Initial Russian invasion group in Kherson Oblast had 12-to-1 superiority in troop numbers over Ukrainian force. The new voice of Ukraine. The Ukrainian armed forces had no chance of holding the defense in Kherson Oblast at the start of the full-scale Russian invasion, with the attacking Russians having a numerical superiority of 12-to-1. As reported in the article How Ukraine Lost the South by NV on November 22. Below are your comments. Can anyone imagine that one country, Russia, has a 12-to-1 ratio of troops and still lost 321,150 troops so far, less than 2 years? Russia is not only losing every battle, they are losing 650 to 1,200 troops a day. Putin emphasized the need to find ways to end this tragedy as soon as possible and noted that Russia has never refused to negotiate with Ukraine. On the contrary, it was Kiev that abandoned the negotiation process when President Volodymyr Zelensky signed a decree prohibiting negotiations with Russia. Zelensky's government not only failed to prepare for the invasion and kept dismissing numerous warnings for the U.S. intelligence but was actively disarming, abandoning defensive positions and removing minefields. They were preparing to surrender Ukraine to Putin, and only the heroic resistance of the goes to show how confident Putin was. But throwing people at a problem only works if the people have a grasp of the goal and the experience to get there. Russia's initial strategy was based on overwhelming the enemy. Didn't work out. In its initial invasion, Russia planned to overturn Ukraine government by a surprise attack and didn't expect any heavy fighting. So few of the Russia troops were combat ready. Next news. Ukraine's parliament supports draft law making English official language of international communication. Ion. Kyiv Independent. The Verkhovna Rada supported the draft law on the status of the English language in Ukraine in its FIRST reading, MP Yaroslav Zalesniak reported on Telegram on November 22. If passed, the law would establish English as an official language of international communication in Ukraine. Below are your comments. According to Ethnologue, English is the most spoken language in the world, including native and non-native speakers. Like Latin or Greek at the time, English has become the world's common language. It is the default language in international business, tourism, technology, and much more. Yeah, I'm pretty sure every country in the world has done this without needing to put up for a vote. They just start teaching it in school, sometimes with catastrophically hilarious results, especially in the fifth world dumps. And yet in 2019, Ukraine made the Ukrainian language mandatory for public sector jobs, which was ended to lock out Russian-speaking public sector workers in eastern Ukraine. At this point, Ukraine should be a de facto territory of the U.S. They should change their flag to red, blue. Never mind. The regime in Kiev is very depressed now, so it will do anything to draw the US and UK into direct war with Russia. First they banned Russian language and Orthodox Church, now forces its citizens to speak English. Later on it will declare that Ukraine is part of the UK or USA. Next news. Russian aggression is the greatest threat to Europe, Austrian Foreign Minister. The new voice of UK. Reign. Russian aggression against Ukraine is the greatest immediate threat to Europe, Austrian Foreign Minister Alexander Schallenberg said at a joint press conference with his Slovakian counterpart on November 22, stressing the need for unity within the European Union, Ukrinform reported. Below are your comments. Let me be the first to voice common sense here. If Mr. Putin withdraws his armies and pays for the damage he has done, that is the end of the war. Otherwise the fight will continue until Russia is soundly defeated. The Austrian foreign minister seems to be forgetful. Zelensky does not allow negotiations with Russia. Putin again offered to hold peace talks. Spaltenberg should keep in mind that he is the minister of a country that is neutral. Maybe he needs a few lessons in neutrality. The Austrian foreign minister is not telling the truth. He is very much following the US propaganda and has obviously forgotten that NATO is moving to Russia's borders, and Russia withdrew from Central Europe. He also forgot that Russia's invasion of Ukraine was provoked by the US. He should resi. When has it been different? World War II was started by Hitler and Stalin jointly invading Poland with the idea of sharing Europe between them. The only reason it did not happen is because Hitler got greedy, and America bailed out Russia who, as Zhukov said, Russia would have perished without help from America. Next news. Russia believes key to victory is internal destabilization in Ukraine, head of Foreign Intelligence Service says. Ukrainska Pravda. Alexander Litvinenko, the head of the Foreign Intelligence Service, believes that Russia is determined to fight as much as necessary, and the war has entered the stage of exhaustion. Russia will concentrate on three tasks regarding Ukraine: gaining advantage on the battlefield, destroying infrastructure and undermining social unity, Litvinenko says. Below are your comments. The Russian scheme might have worked if not for Putin's use of atrocity genocide warfare. Intended to terrorize the population, it motivates them to fight forever if necessary. Everyone has lost a relative to Russian crimes, or has experienced theft, torture, beatings or kidnapping at Rus. The good old Rue clowns still claiming this is all to return to the glory of the old country. Oh well, their waste of resources and fodder for such a pointless gain. Russia has 3 allies supplying it with inferior weapons and ammo. Ukraine has 40 allies supplying it with superior weapons, ammo, intelligence, and tactics. Guess who is going to win, and who is going to lose? If Russia can do this with Ukraine, then what's stopping them from doing this to other countries just Remember this: Russia needs to be stopped now or they will do this again and again. Destabilization works. Look at Barbara Spitor and George Soros. Next news. Video of Libyan city destroyed by flood shared with false claim it shows aftermath of bombing in Gaza. AFP. Large parts of Gaza have been flattened after Israel launched a bombing and ground campaign in the Palestinian territory in retaliation for an unprecedented attack by Hamas militants on October 7. An aerial footage of a town in ruins has circulated on social media, however, with a false claim. It shows the aftermath of Israeli strikes in Gaza. It was in fact filmed in a city in northeast Libya that was hit by a devastating flood in September. Below are your comments. We should believe only what the Israelis tell us. That does not change the basic fact. France, UK and the US have destroyed the Libyan state, unleashing the civil war in that country for the last 12 years and creating another flux of emigration towards Europe. The same thing happened with the war in Iraq in 2003, which has destabilized the whole region. It is very common for those people to lie online. Tachia. No, that photo would be a consequence of the bombing campaign by NATO against Libya, destroying our government and its ability to invest in infrastructure to prevent flood damage like that. The media will do whatever they can to get ratings, clicks on the internet. The reputation of the media is so soiled now, that it will take a couple of generations to get back to where people are trusting what they see and hear on the media. Next news. Hungary set to receive millions in EU money despite Orban's threats to veto Ukraine aid. Associated Press. Hungary is set to receive €900 million, $981 million, in European Union money, the EU's executive arm said Thursday, despite the Hungarian Prime Minister's attempts to scupper the bloc's support for Ukraine. The proposal to unlock the money in pre-financing came as Orban, a frequent critic of the EU and of 10 at odds with European leaders over his government's record on the rule of law, threatens to derail Ukraine's ambition to join the bloc, and to block the disbursement of a planned 50. Below are your comments. Ukraine is not a part of the EU, and it depends on the goodwill of each EU country whether they choose to help Ukraine or not. Britain should take a leading role in providing support, as they are more vocal and proactive. It will be interesting to see how Brits can contribute their own money to some. Hungary should not receive a penny from the EU. In fact, the EU should expel them from the bloc. Misplace the funds until he is on the same page as the people giving him the aid. With Russian oligarchs now heavily investing their personal fortunes in Hungary to evade sanctions, the USA, EU must consider sanctions against Hungary. Veto any EU funds to Hungary until they allow funds to Ukraine. Next news. Russians use 40 to 50 drones in Ukraine's east per day. Ukrainska Pravda. Russian forces have used 42 kamikaze drones on Ukrainian positions near the city of Bakhmut in Donetsk. Oblast and 18 more drones they have launched on the Lyman-Kupiansk front in the past 24 hours. Source: Interfax Ukraine, citing Volodymyr Fito, chief of the public relations service of the Ukrainian Ground D Forces Command, on air of the National Joint 24/7 newscast, quote, "We see that 60 drones are used in just one day." Below are your comments. Russia is depending on drones for most of their attacks now, as they have lost much of their armor and missile systems. Russia is losing now and Ukraine is gaining more ground every day. Cheap, mass-manufactured drones, consuming expensive defense systems, makes for a war of attrition against 31 NATO countries, including the U.S. Counting the depreciation and cost of the U.S. military, the U.S. taxpayer is easily in for over $1 trillion. So far. An extra $3 trillion under Trump was wreck. Unless the drones have all their components made in Russia, they must have some foreign components and them. Surgically flatten the factories that produce the components, no matter if the country is friend or foe. Drinking and smoking while driving a drone is normal for Russians. Next news. Ukraine takes out Russian Buk air defense system, as well as a routine 1,000+ invaders in last day. The new voice of Ukraine. In addition to eliminating over 1,000 Russian invaders yesterday, a common occurrence over the past few weeks, Ukraine's defense forces destroyed a Russian Buk M1 air defense system near Tavria, announced Tavria Operational Group Commander Alexander Tarnovsky on Telegram on November 24. Below are your comments. Numbers may be high, but regardless, Russia is paying a heavy price for their stupid land grab that air dictator wants for his glory. The Russian pawns are paying with their lives. Meat grinder attacks can lose 1,000 or more daily, as happened yesterday. Too many are non-Russians from Central Asia. That's the catch with pan-Slavism. Non-Russian ethnics get used as cannon fodder while Russian ethnics have it easy in the rear. In peacetime the same minorities are kept poor. Russians are out in force mad how badly they are getting beaten and losing so much near every day. Not much left. Incompetent soldiers and officers are not hard to eliminate, especially attacking the Ukrainians. Though Ukrainian military leadership is way too timid and should have taken the rest of K. Next news. Head of Ukraine's leading party claims Russia proposed peace in exchange for neutrality. Ukrainska Pravda. David Arakhamia, leader of the Servant of the People faction who led the Ukrainian delegation at PACE talks with the Russians in Belarus and Turkey in 2022, said that the Russian delegation promised Kyiv peace in exchange for refusing to join NATO, but the Ukrainians did not believe them. Below are your comments. We're approaching 2 years since Russia invaded Ukraine back in February 2022. Since then, after all the cities destroyed, infrastructures that were damaged or destroyed, death to of citizens, displaced citizens. It would be interesting to know how that offer back then would be considered now in That is exactly what Russia wanted even before the war, during the negotiations with NATO for a year. Russians do not want NATO in their front door. It made sense to me. It also makes sense to many countries in the world. What does this war have done to Ukraine? A lot of destruction. Sure, the Moscovians can be trusted. Didn't they agree never to attack when Ukraine gave up their nuclear weapons? The Russians promised peace when Ukraine gave up their nukes. How did that go? Next news. Reuters. Turkey says that Sweden will not join NATO before November 28 meeting. Kyiv Independent. Turkey will not conclude its internal debates on Sweden's accession to NATO in time for the meeting of the alliance's foreign ministers on November 28 to 29, which was hoped to be an opportunity to announce that Sweden was joining NATO, sources told Reuters on November 23. Below are your comments. Erdogan seems to derive perverse pleasure from toying with NATO and its interests. He has made Turkey more of a weak spot than an asset for NATO. When will the West, NATO, get their heads out of the sand and acknowledge that Turks are not allies? They are Putin's lifeline and Hamas supporters. Start sanctions. Turkey is tolerated by NATO. Will never get full trust. No F-35s or high-tech electronics. Sweden is probably linked in unofficially and trusted. NATO is stuck with Turkey because of the Cold War. It's time NATO rid itself of Russia's allies in NATO. Enemies within make the alliance dysfunctional. Turkey must be thrown out of NATO. Turkey with Erdogan leadership doesn't belong to democratic nations. Next news. BRICS leaders, to hold video summit Tuesday on Gaza. Bloomberg. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa will chair a video summit with BRICS leaders on Tuesday to discuss the Israel-Hamas conflict. Most read from Bloomberg. Citigroup cuts over 300 senior manager roles in latest restructuring. Nearly all of OpenAI staff threaten to go to Microsoft if board doesn't quit the doomed mission behind Sam Altman's shock ouster from OpenAI. Microsoft ends weekend of OpenAI drama with coup of its own. OpenAI in intense discussions to quell potential staff mutin. Below are your comments. Let me guess. Israel will call South Africa an apartheid country and anti-Semitic? Two worthless entities. UN and WHO. Controlled by China, WEF and Bill Gates. Yes, the groups that want population reduction and control ND are behind the mRNA shot. Not listening to them at all. Saudi Arabia, Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, Argentina and the United Arab Emirates. United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres will also participate in the virtual meeting. What's the plan to get Hamas to return the hostages? Next news. UN agencies hope truce will allow aid to flow to northern Gaza. Reuters. Geneva. Reuters, UN. Agencies voiced hope that a shaky truce that began between Israel and Hamas on Friday would allow a ramping up of aid and the first flows to northern Gaza in weeks as fresh hospital rescue efforts got underway. Aid agencies have said they are aiming to deliver supplies to the northern part of the Palestinian NCL Avenue, where hospitals have collapsed due to bombings and lack of fuel, and where there are major concerns about dehydration and disease in a situation described below are your comments. They let the supplies in, and then Hamas destroys them. Win-win. Hostages freed, aid to civilians, gas to hospitals, and a day of rest to regroup. It is working. If aid wasn't part of the negotiated truce, then shame on Gazans for being poor negotiators. Among almost everything else they do. Israel is holding medical staff for questioning. And that includes the hospital director, who has been evacuating patients to Egypt. Next news. Ukraine tries to push Russians back from Kherson on left bank of Dnipro River to save it from attack. Ukrainska Pravda. One of the goals of the Ukrainian armed forces on the left bank of the Dnipro River on the Kherson front is to push the Russians further away from the right bank to protect civilians. Source: General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Quote, the Ukrainian Defense Forces conducted a series of successful actions on the left bank of the Dnipro River on the Kherson front. Below are your comments. There are reports of at least one low-flying Mi-26 helicopter ferrying Ukrainian heavy equipment and troops to the east bank of the Dnipro. If true, this spells retreat for the Russians. Apparently, the Russians mistakenly thought that the Ukrainians were as inept at river crossings as they. Well, good luck with pushing them beyond the artillery reach. So, now you have Ukrainians on the other side of the Dnipro without armor or adequate artillery support, and essentially in a bleep sack. Next news. New Maldives president is sworn in and vows to remove Indian troops. Associated Press. Mohamed Muizu was sworn in Friday as the Maldives' fifth democratically elected president and said he will ensure there is no foreign military presence in the archipelago. Muizu, who is seen as pro-China, campaigned on a promise to evict Indian military personnel and balance trade, which he said was heavily in favor of India under his predecessor, Ibrahim Mohammed Sola. Below are your comments. Maldives is basically Indian islands and people are of Indian origin though practicing barbarian religion Islam. China will ultimately occupy Maldives. China has suppressed Islam in Xinjiang province and the Chinese government has reportedly arbitrarily detained more than 1 million Muslims in Reduka. Chines are eliminating Islam in China, while they are friends with Muslim nations to take their natural resources and sell goods to them. Neither Saudi Arabia nor UAE speak a word about what happens to Muslims in China. Next news. Ukrainian army reports 30% surge in Russian assaults near Avdiivka. Losses of some positions. The new voice of Ukraine. Russia sharply increased the number of assault operations near Avdiivka, Donetsk Oblast, before November 22, with both sides losing and gaining positions as the fighting rages on. Spokesperson for Ukraine Tavria Operational Command Alexander Stupin said on Radio Svoboda on November 22. Below are your comments. So Ukraine admits Russians are making gains. They need to be quiet or Congress will stop sending money. Beginning of the end of mostly highly paid foreign bleepers. Paid by US dollars. Midgate with Hiskiev gang to be hunted down and lined up against the wall. Make it shish. Ort and sweet too. Finally, Russia is commencing to return the favor with cluster munitions. Only instead of the 43-kilo artillery shell cluster munition that the UKRAPI bleeps are using on civilians. Russia is using 500 kilograms guided bomb cluster munitions. Next news. Interfaith leaders hold event calling for peace in Middle East. WHTM. Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Please wait a moment. Members of the Jewish, Christian and Muslim communities gathered at the Hadi Mosque as part of an initiative called Voices for Peace. This initiative is a chance for people of. Below are your comments. There are reports of at least one low-flying Mi-26 helicopter ferrying Ukrainian heavy equipment and troops to the east bank of the Dnipro. If true, this spells retreat for the Russians. Apparently, the Russians mistakenly thought that the Ukrainians were as inept at river crossings as they. Well, good luck with pushing them beyond the artillery reach. So, now you have Ukrainians on the other side of the Dnipro without armor or adequate artillery support. And essentially in a bleep sack. Next news. Finland to close all but one border crossing with Russia. Kyiv Independent. The measure, which is to take effect on November 24, follows Helsinki's accusations that Russia is orchestrating the influx of migrants as retributio for Finland's entry into NATO. Below are your comments. Probably be a good idea to donate damaged Russian hardware for a global parade to showcase the Federation's aggression and failure in military tech. Closing borders to Russia is a good idea. Russian terrorists kidnapped over 17,000 Ukrainian children. Where's the outrage? Goes to show just what a dump Russia is. No one's migrating to Russia. No refugee seeks out Russian bombers to migrate to, all want out of Russia, even the sane Russians want out. Surprising that the Wuskis don't force conscript the migrants to fight in their Storm Z units. They do it with all the residents from Central Asia. Next news. FSB claims Ukrainian agent plotted bleep of senior Russian officer. Ukrainska Pravda. Russia's Federal Security Service, FSB, has claimed to have detained a Ukrainian citizen who was preparing to assassinate a senior Russian officer in Voronezh. Source: RIA Novosti and TASS, Kremlin-aligned Russian news agencies. Details. The FSB said it had detained an agent of Ukraine's special services in Voronezh as he was preparing a terrorist attack on a senior Russian military officer. Below are your comments. Nothing wrong with that, he is defending his country. Keep it up, Ukraine. Ukraine is winning. Slava Ukraine. Well, that is the objective. If Russia doesn't like it, then they just need to leave Ukraine. Where there is one, there are many more. Primitivy Russian will not be able to rest. Slava Ukraini. Next news. 13 Israelis, 12 Thai nationals released in exchange with Hamas. United Press International. Hamas released 13 Israeli hostages and 12 Thai nationals on Friday afternoon as part of the limited negotiated pause in fighting between Israel and Hamas, the first since hostilities began on October. Below are your comments. I'm glad they are being released, but bet their experiences will haunt them for the rest of their lives. Let's hope the IDF keeps the pressure on and ends Hamas. There is a difference between hostages and prisoners. Release all hostages. May people learn to live together. The exchange rate of 3 for 1 tells the entire world it takes 3 whole Palestinians to equal 1 their nationality. 13 Israelis, 12 Thai and no Americans? Next news. Ukraine sanctions over 300 Russian, foreign companies. Kyiv Independent. Ukraine has introduced economic sanctions against more than 300 companies around the world, President Volodymyr Zelensky announced via presidential decree on November 23. Below are your comments. These sanctions will be a real game changer. Hey Ukraine, sanctions don't work. Well done. More of it, please. You need hollow clown comedy. Watch Ukrainsky Pravda News. Wow, another delusional dictator. Please subscribe to my channel. And if you like it, please thumbs up.